Imagine being born into a world with no birth certificates, no baby name books, and no government office to register your existence. Yet somehow every single human who ever lived still walked away with a name. So, how exactly did ancient humans figure out what to call each other? The answer turns out to be one of the most fascinating windows into how the human mind actually works. Long before written language existed, names were never random sounds strung together for cuteness, the way many parents choose names today. Instead, names were functional, spiritual, and deeply tied to survival, identity, and community. In small hunter-gatherer bands, where everyone knew everyone, a name had to instantly communicate something meaningful about the person carrying it. Anthropologists studying isolated tribal societies that still exist today along with archaeological and linguistic evidence from ancient civilizations, have pieced together several major patterns in how prehistoric and early historic humans named their children. And honestly, once you understand these patterns, you start to realize naming a child was never a casual decision. It was almost a ritual act, one that connected the individual to nature, to ancestors, to fate, and to the entire worldview of the culture they were born into. One of the earliest and most universal naming methods was based on physical characteristics, or circumstances of birth. A child born during a storm might be named something meaning thunder. A child with unusually dark hair might be named after the color black in that language. And a child born feet first, considered either a bad omen or a sign of strength, depending on the culture, would often carry a name reflecting that unusual entrance into the world. This pattern still survives today in many Native American, African, and Pacific Islander naming traditions, where descriptive names remain common even now. Another massive influence on ancient naming was the natural world itself. These were people who lived in constant, intimate contact with animals, plants, weather, and the land. So it made complete sense that names like Wolf, Eagle Eye, Little Bear, River Song, or Born of the Mountain were incredibly common across cultures from the Americas to Siberia to Africa. This wasn't poetic flourish. It was practical. Ancient people believed that naming a child after a powerful animal or natural force could transfer some of that creature's strength, speed, or wisdom onto the child, almost like a spiritual insurance policy for a world where infant mortality was brutally high and every advantage mattered. Speaking of spirituality, religion and mythology played an enormous role in ancient naming practices. And this is where things get really interesting. In many ancient societies, from Mesopotamia to Egypt to early Vedic India, names were often chosen to honor gods, invoke divine protection, or literally embed a prayer into the child's identity. You'd see names that translated to things like beloved of Ra, gift of the gods, or protected by the moon. These weren't just labels. Ancient people genuinely believed that a name carried spiritual power, that speaking someone's name could influence their destiny, and that choosing the wrong name could invite misfortune. This is why naming ceremonies, in so many ancient cultures, involved priests, shamans, elders, or religious rituals, rather than just parents casually picking something they liked. In fact, some ancient cultures practiced what anthropologists call true naming beliefs, where the real, sacred name of a person was kept secret, used only in private or spiritual contexts, while a separate public nickname was used in everyday life. They believed that if an enemy or evil spirit learned your true name, they could gain power over you. And traces of this belief still show up in folklore today, like in stories about demons or spirits who lose their power once their true name is spoken aloud. Ancestral naming was another enormous pattern across ancient cultures, where children were named directly after grandparents, deceased relatives, or respected community elders. Not just as a tribute, but because many ancient societies believed in some form of reincarnation, or spiritual continuity, where naming a newborn after a recently deceased relative meant that person's spirit, or essence, lived on through the child. This practice was incredibly common in ancient China, among indigenous Australian communities, in West African cultures, and even in ancient Jewish and Slavic traditions, where naming after living relatives was sometimes avoided specifically because it was believed the soul couldn't be in two places, attached to two different bodies at once. Birth order and numerical naming was another surprisingly common ancient practice, especially in East Asian and Southeast Asian cultures, where the literal position of a child in the family, firstborn, secondborn, thirdborn, was baked directly into their name. name. This served the very practical purpose of instantly communicating family structure and hierarchy within a household or clan, something that mattered enormously in societies built around strict social order and ancestor worship. Time and season of birth was yet another major factor, and this one is especially fascinating because it shows up almost everywhere, independently, from ancient Chinese zodiac-based naming to African cultures that named children based on the day of the week they were born, like the Akan people of West Africa, whose traditional day names are still widely used today, to Norse and Germanic tribes, who sometimes named children after seasonal events or astronomical occurrences. Because ancient humans were far more attuned to cycles of time, moon phases, harvests, and seasons than most people are today. And a name tied to timing was a way of anchoring a person to the natural rhythm of the universe itself. Occupational and destiny-based naming also emerged as societies grew more complex, where names weren't just about the present moment of birth, but were aspirational, essentially a wish or a prophecy for who this child would become. So you'd get names meaning strong warrior, wise leader, or bringer of peace, reflecting the hopes parents or elders had for that child's future role in the community. And this aspirational naming tradition is actually the direct ancestor of a huge percentage of names still used across the world today, including many popular American names that originally meant things like victorious, noble, or gift from God in their original languages, even if most parents today have no idea of the deeper meaning behind the name on the birth certificate. It's also worth noting that in many ancient cultures, naming wasn't even a single event. It was a process. A child might receive a temporary name at birth, sometimes even a deliberately unflattering or plain name meant to trick evil spirits into ignoring the child during the vulnerable early days of infancy, and then receive a real name later, sometimes after surviving a critical age threshold, like 1-year-old, or after demonstrating some notable trait or achievement. This reflects just how seriously ancient people took the danger of infant mortality, and how naming was intertwined with protection magic and superstition, rather than pure identification. Some ancient warrior cultures, like certain Germanic and Celtic tribes, even had the practice of earning names, or name additions later in life, based on deeds, battles won, or personal transformations, meaning your birth name wasn't necessarily your final name. Your identity could literally evolve and be renamed as your life and reputation changed, which is a strikingly different concept from the modern Western idea of a fixed permanent legal name assigned once at birth and never questioned again. What's remarkable when you step back and look at all these patterns together, physical traits, nature, spirituality, ancestry, birth order, timing, and destiny, is that they weren't isolated to one region or one civilization. These same naming logics popped up independently across completely disconnected ancient cultures on different continents who had no contact with each other whatsoever, which strongly suggests that naming children this way wasn't some random cultural quirk. It was something close to a universal human instinct, a deep psychological need to make a name mean something, to make it carry weight, story, protection, and connection, rather than just being an arbitrary sound. And honestly, that instinct never actually left us. Because even today, when American parents scroll through baby name apps looking for something meaningful, something tied to a grandparent, something with a beautiful meaning in another language, or something that just feels powerful and destined, they are unknowingly repeating the exact same instincts that guided a mother in ancient Mesopotamia 5,000 years ago, choosing a name to honor a god, or a father in prehistoric Europe, naming his son after the wolf he hoped would guide the boy's spirit, which means that every single time you tell someone what your name means or why your parents chose it, you're not just sharing a fun fact, you're participating in one of the oldest, most deeply human traditions our species has ever practiced. A tradition that predates written history itself, and one that, whether we realize it or not, still quietly shapes identity, belonging, and even destiny in every corner of the modern world today.